Prime Minister. Nice to see you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Fighting for freedom, for our territorial integrity. Your Highness.
How are you?
Thank you so much.
Very pleased to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
سعيد في مقابلتي لك لأول مرة أعرف أحد المسؤولين في أوكرانيا، مع العلم أنا دائما سمو أميرنا.
I enjoyed listening to your speech.
Yes?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. You were relaxed, which is good.
Hello, how are you? Very good. Chief of Staff.
And you are ready for action.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Very nice seeing you.
Very well, thank you.
Thank you very much for this meeting. Even if there are people here at the summit who have a different view on the war on our land, calling it a conflict, I'm sure that we can all be united in saving people from the cages of Russian prisons. Unfortunately, there are some in the world and here among you who turn a blind eye to those cages and illegal annexations. And I'm here so that everyone can take an honest look, no matter how hard the Russians try to influence. There must still be independence. In the occupied Crimea are Muslims. And I'm more than sure that none of you will agree to surrender a third of your country to the invaders. And I'm more than sure none of you would watch without a fight how foreigners steal the children of your people. Hundreds of thousands of our children are deported to Russia, separated from their relatives. And there in Russia, they are trying to teach our children to hate their natives. I'm here so that everyone can take an honest look. You can choose the point of help that you consider appropriate, and I will be grateful to each of you who will choose exactly the direction of rescuing people held in Russian captivity. Aggressiveness doesn't come from strength, but from the understanding that the time of empires has passed.
Zelensky wouldn't be invited to all these places and all these if they did not think Ukraine was going to come out of the war in good shape. That it simply wouldn't be happening. No one would want to be around a leader they think is going to be defeated in a country that's going to collapse. So the reality is people have basically decided Ukraine is going to come out of this war with basically an intact, strong country. The question is whether it gets back all of its territory or not. And I think that's the reality now that has come through to people, that they see a Russian military that cannot conquer Ukraine. It cannot conquer Bakhmut, or can just finally take Bakhmut after 7 months. So Ukraine has saved itself to this point. And the question is, how much of itself does it get back? I think on the one hand, it's a sign of they feel the situation is one now that is under control. Basically, the Russians have no chance to attack Kyiv again. The capital is safe. It's also a sign of the Ukrainian confidence in themselves. Putin's hiding down deep in bunkers. That's not a confident sight. If Zelensky can say, I'm going to go. I can leave my capital behind, knowing that the state is safe and the army will protect the state. That's an extraordinary sign of confidence that he is making. So I actually think it's a very important thing that he does these things, because he's acting like a head of state that can travel the world and be respected. And that will, I think, help confirm in people's mind that Ukraine is going to come out of this war in good shape.
The most peculiar military offensive in modern times. Why do you think that?
Well, because the whole thing about Bakhmut, which has been very strange from the beginning, is the Russian need to take it, because Bakhmut is of no strategic importance. It doesn't make anything. So there's no war industry there. There's no raw materials there that are desperately needed for the Ukrainian war effort. There are no people there. Almost everybody has left. I mean, it's basically just empty buildings. And yet the Russians seem to put enormous store into the idea that they would take it, so that they were going to make, and it probably was, at least for a while, a entirely political campaign from the Russian point of view. One, it was they needed to take something. They needed to show some success for what they were doing. But then also there was a competitive, it seems, Wagner Russian army element too, where Wagner wanted to show that they could take Bakhmut, or Prigozhin wanted to say for his own. So the Russians were taking it not so much to damage Ukraine, not to sort of damage Ukraine as a fighting force, but actually for their own domestic political needs or political effects. But therefore, the Ukrainians, I think, understood that, and they understood that the Russians were going to expend enormous resources to take Bakhmut for these political reasons. And the Ukrainians decided, therefore, to fight for the city, because knowing the Russians felt they had to take it. This Ukrainian attack is going to be the most important military operation this year by a long way, and up as long with sort of the defense of Kyiv, probably the most important military operations the Ukrainians are going to run in this entire war. Now, what they don't want to happen, or didn't want to happen, is for the Russians to sit back in the defensive, take Bakhmut, declare victory. They're building all these trench lines, and to go back into the defensive. And that was the thing the Ukrainians don't want, because the Ukrainians don't want a big, strong Russian army sitting in all these defenses. So the Ukrainians thought, how do we actually make the Russians expend force? We know they want to take Bakhmut, and other towns like Advika too. There were a few other towns that seemed to be obsessing the Russians. And therefore, as horrible as it is, we have to fight for these cities, because that's going to keep the Russians attacking and keep the Russians losing soldiers and equipment. And in that sense, it seems to have done the horrible thing it was supposed to do.